Hi guys, today we continue with our WebRTC tutorial and I'm gonna show you how to create a room on our web server and let users to join it. We will use WebSockets, Express.js and React context, and for styling we will use TypeScript CSS. So let's start. First thing we're gonna do is to open our client app.tsx and we will get rid of this default boilerplate code. Let's create a button, start new meeting. As you see, button appeared here, but it looks not very nice. And to make it look better, we will install TypeScript CSS. Let's open the documentation for it. This link, I will leave it below the video, explains how to use TypeScript CSS with React app. We will need to run yarn add TypeScript post CSS and auto prefixer. Post CSS and auto prefixer are dependencies for TypeScript CSS. Let's install. And this command npx TypeScript CSS init will create our TypeScript config.js and post CSS config.js files. Let's run it as well. As you see, it created our config. Following the instruction, we have to add this to our config for TypeScript CSS. Now in our index CSS we will include these directives. Let's do it. Instead of this default code, we'll just do this. We can check our application. Let's just run it. And let's see how it looks now. You see default TypeScript styles applied to our page. Our button now looks different, but we can't really tell that it's a button. So let's add some styles for it. We go to app.tsx and add the class name. In TypeScript CSS, you just use utility classes with different properties. For example, you can use class for color, class for border size, border radius, or for text size. You can find these classes in TypeScript documentation. Here, for example, all the colors we can use, spacing, and also we have grid, we have sizing, typography. So let's use these colors that we have here, and you also can customize your colors in your config, but we will not do it now. We will save our time and just use default colors. For this button it will be background PG, rows 400. And let's see what is this. It's a nice pink color. Now we need to add some padding for our button. This is vertical padding and this is horizontal padding. And let's add some rounded corners. Let's see what we have. Yeah, this button now looks better. It looks like a real button. And we can also make text bigger a little bit. Let's add a hover effect for our button too. We can do it this way. It will be just darker color, darker shade of this color that we use. And I would also like to make the text white. Let's see how could we move our button to the center. It should be here in flexbox and grid. Let me check. Justify content, justify center. Okay, this is the right class. And now we have our button in the middle. So what we're gonna do next? Now I just want to refactor this to the separate file. All our logic related with WebSockets, I want to move to context. I will use React Context API and use context hook for it. Let's create our new file and call it room context, for example. And in this file we will move our import, our link, and let's create a room context. Initially our context will be equal to null, and let's type it as null or any. Here we will connect to our WebSocket, and then we will export from this file our room provider. And this provider will accept children, and it will return just let me use a capital letter here. So it will return provider, and in this provider we will just pass our WebSocket for now, and here we will render our children. And now we will wrap our entire app in this provider to be able to use our WebSocket from anywhere in our application without prompt drilling. And now let's add our provider. We can add it here. Let's move our join button to separate component as well. And let's copy here our button. Instead of this one, we will just use this join component, and we can get rid of this and this and this, and this use effect we also don't need anymore. So now our root application component is much cleaner. Yeah, I have an error here because I forgot to return here. If we return it's all fixed. So we have our nice beautiful button. So when we click this button, we want to send a message to our server that we are creating a new room, and we join this room. So now in our join button we can use our context. Because we wrapped the entire app in provider, we can call use context and call our room context from anywhere we want. Not room provider, but room context. I probably forgot to export it. And we can create a method join room, and when user clicks it, we will just emit a message to our server that we want to join room. And let's call it on click. Now we have to go to our server and to listen to this message, join room. In our callback on connection, we can add a new event listener. And again, in the callback, we can just console log that user joined the room. Now let's switch to the tab where our server is running, and let's just try to click our button. And as you see, we get the message on the server and we see our console log that user is joining the room. But I want to refactor it as well, because here in our index.ts server file, we will have the main entry point for different actions, different messages that we want to listen for. And if we will just write it here in this callback, it will be a lot of code in one file that does different things. I want to create another file and move this logic that is related to room to this separate file. So let's create a file and let's name it a room handler. So in the new file, we will export new function, room handler, and we will pass our socket with the type socket, obviously, and here we can basically just listen, just copy this listen to our event, and instead of writing this here, we will just use this function. Let's import it and let's check if it still works the same way. Yes, it still listens to the event. And actually, I think this join room, it should be different function. It's for joining users to already existing rooms. But if you want to create a room, we need to listen for event that will have the name create room. And again, let's separate actual logic from event listeners. Let's create two methods. One will be for joining room, and another one will be for creating room. And let's fix it in our join button. Instead of join, we will create room. And we can rename our join button just to create button. This will be better. So what do we want to do when user clicks this button? We want to, on our server, to create a new room, to give a random string as an ID for it, and to redirect our user on client, to redirect our user to the page for this room, where it will be the UI of our conference call. So let's implement this first on the server. We want to create an ID for our room. Let's use the library that will create unique IDs for us. The name of this library is UUID, and we also need to add types for it, as we're gonna use it with TypeScript. In our room handler, we can import v4 from this library. Now when we call our room, create room, we can just generate a new room ID. We tell our WebSocket to join this room with this ID, and then we want to tell our user that a room is created and he joined it. So we send it back. So we send the message back to our user that room is created, and we will send a room ID. And now in our room context, we can add use effect, hook, and listen for our event, for our create room event, room created. And here we will create a function that will get a room ID. For now, let's just log it. And let's try it again. Okay, we have type any. It will be a string, of course. So let's start our server and let's try it. User created a room and we're getting an ID of our new room. So now I want to redirect our user to something like room and ID of this room. How to do it? For this we need to install a React Router library, and let's do it. Let's install the last version. Now we can just import stuff from our React Router library. We need browser router, route, and routes. Again, you can check how to use it in the documentation. I will leave the link, and I will not stop in details on this. So we just wrap our entire application, and here please note that our room provider should be inside in browser router provider to be able to use functions, use methods from this library. And now here in our browser router we can just add different routes, pages for our application, and let's create a folder with pages and create a home and the room page. In our home, let's just copy our join button and in our room we will just return our room ID for now, and I will show how we're gonna get this room ID. Now in our index.tsx, so now instead of our app, we can just add our roots. And here to add 2 pages. One will be with the default path. Element will be home. And another one will be a room and ID of the room, and we will pass it here. In our room, using React router hooks, we can access our room ID. Now I will show you how. Just let's make sure it still works. Yeah, we have our home page and our room page. In our room context, we want to not just console log the ID, but to redirect our user to the page with our room. To do it, we can do it very easy using navigate, using use navigate hook from our React router library. And now here we just use navigate and we pass our URL here. Let's check it. We go to the main page, we click join the room, and we redirect our user to the room page. And now in our room, we want to let user know in which room we are now. And again, we will use a hook from React router. Hook use params. It helps us to get the data from our URL, which ID we go to. Get our ID from this use params hook, and we can render it here. Yeah, now it's here. We don't need this, sorry. Yeah, now we have our room ID. And what else we want to do? If our first user who created a room shares this link with someone else, we want this second user to join room as well. For this, we again use our WebSocket from our context, and then use effect. On every ID change, we can join our room. Let's send the message. join room to the server, and we have to tell which exactly room we want to join. We will use ID for it. Let's check if it works. On our server, in room handler, we have this join room. User joined the room, but we need to specify which ID we're getting here. Again, type of this room ID will be string. And let's console log which room we're joining. So now if we refresh this page, we are getting the message that user joined this room. And another thing I want to do here is to move this socket join code to our join room function. So let's check. First we just create the room, and then when a user gets redirected to the new URL, he joins the room. And let's try with another tab. Just open the link, and as you see, user joins the room that is already created before. So that's it for today, and in the next video we will continue, and I will show you how to send messages and events to all participants in the room, and share video stream between all users in the room. So if you're interested, just watch my next video.